Well, let's talk about the delegates, since you mentioned that. And I think, everybody wants reforms, but they always want to be in control of the process. Like, who is going to be the one, the delegates making the decisions? So what are your proposals for who gets to be part of the convention? How many people? How are they chosen?
This is the most difficult question to answer when it comes to putting together a constitutional convention. Who gets to sit on the convention? How do you build a constitutional convention that is A, neutral, not in anyone's pocket, that's B, that's qualified and educated and knows what they're talking about? So it's a delicate balancing act, and from the outset we understand that there's no perfect method. There's no method that you can please every person in the state. There's no method that will please every interest group in the state, but there are some methods that are better than others. So there are three possible ways of doing this. You have an election, and where delegates run, say in assembly districts. Each assembly district gets 3 delegates. Delegates, by the way, have to be representative by population, so the assembly districts are designed that way. So if we did that, we would more than likely get Labour running their slate of candidates, Howard Jarvis running their slate of candidates, Democrats, Republicans, Greens, everybody running their slates of candidates, and we'd end up with a constitutional convention that looks very similar to the legislature. And that's not what we want. So we discarded the election model pretty early in the process. The second model that we looked at for a very long time was the scientific random selection model. Have each assembly district select, say, 200 people randomly through DMV rolls, taxpayer rolls, election rolls, to get the broadest, most diverse collection of people from that assembly district. The plan was to sequester them for a weekend in a room like this, and have them talk about the Constitutional Convention, their ideas, what a Constitutional Convention would involve, the sacrifices that they would have to take time off work, etc., and serve. And that group then would self-select, say, 5 people to go forward and represent their assembly district. That way you would sort of weed out a lot of the gadflies and the crazies, and you would get 5 well-qualified people from that assembly district, self-selected by their peers from a random selection model. And the third selection model is an appointment model. Have each county council appoint one conventioneer to represent their county, and then for each, and then insert number here, each additional number of residents would get an additional conventioneer. And the process that we'd put together for that would be to have the county council appoint a commission, an independent commission, who would do the selecting. And it would be kind of a I would imagine a Senate confirmation hearing type process, where the people would come and say, I want to be a delegate and here's why, and they would be put through a process of questions, etc., and then the commission would select that county's delegate or delegates. That way you get, the beauty of that particular process is you get a lot of expertise, you get a lot of very qualified people, a lot of people who won't need to be brought up to speed on the issues of the day, the issues that are facing California. But it also, the drawbacks of that particular model, it's not as democratic as the random selection model. It's a lot of the usual faces doing the selecting. So we're looking currently at a hybrid model. Have a portion of the delegates be selected randomly and a portion selected through that appointment process. So you get a convention that's composed of average Californians, self-selected by their peers by assembly district, plus some appointed by county, and who would more than likely be a little more qualified and a little more educated to the issues of the day. And that way you get sort of the best of both worlds. Not a perfect selection model by any means, but we think we're getting close to probably the best selection model. We've got a ways to go. We're still tinkering with the process, and we say we're not going to get a perfect process, but I think we can get a good process. And as we've said from day one, since we embarked on this, we can never let the perfect be the enemy of the good, because the problems facing California are so dire. We can't let the thing fall apart on a minor delegate selection issue that may not amount to too much at the end of the day.
How many people are you talking about?
Well, if we did the third model, the county selection model, it would be somewhere around 200 total delegates. The hybrid model could be 2 to 3 times that number. We haven't decided, again, we haven't decided on a final absolute number, what would work best. Other states have constitutional conventions regularly. This is not something that's a very radical idea outside of California. And the numbers differ from state to state. Some states will have them by assembly district, one per, and their conventions look just like their legislatures. We think California is such a large and a diverse state that our convention would have to be larger than our elected body as it currently stands. So I would guess, and don't quote me on this, it would be somewhere in the 400, but it could be bigger, it could be smaller.
And then how do they decide what issues? Because I guess what happens is they would go through all the issues and I guess vote to put it on the ballot?
Constitutional conventions in other states and in other countries operate by consensus. They're very different from legislative bodies. Legislative bodies are composed of caucuses and political parties. This will be a neutral, apolitical body. So they don't come with the kind of baggage that, no offense, Fiona, that legislators bring with them. They're not championing any particular interest. They don't accept campaign contributions. They don't have to, actually they won't be allowed to meet with anybody outside the convention hall to discuss issues. They will be very strictly confined by Brown Act and by all sorts of jury sequestration type rules and regulations. But they operate by consensus. You generally get constitutional conventions voting on issues 85, 90, 95% in favor or against of propositions and proposals. How the convention would be staffed would be up to the convention. They would make that decision more than likely. We're proposing that the FPPC, the Fair Political Practices Commission, would perhaps put together a team of experts to advise the Constitutional Convention. That's one idea we're exploring. That's a pretty neutral arbiter that everybody in the state, to most degree, respects. But the convention would most likely it would operate by Robert's rules, but it would put together its own operating structure and its own rules of operation.